What's happening, baby? So I want to start this episode off by saying I apologize for the mess behind me. As you see, bunch of boxes. I, just like every single player that we are going to be talking about today here on the Fantasy Football Huddle, am moving to a new home. So here in the next maybe 2 weeks or so, you'll be seeing the Huddle Chat Sports in a brand new studio. And I'm so excited. Thank y'all for putting out that positive energy, those positive vibes, those prayers, whatever it is y'all do. We got us a new home. And like I said today, we're discussing all of the people in new homes, at least all of the ones that are very valuable and bring a big impact to fantasy football, whether it be positively or negatively. We're going to look at a lot of the biggest free agency moves, the biggest off-season trades, a lot of the biggest moves that have happened leading up to this season that we're going to be going into that 2022 fantasy football season. Now, before we get started, as always, I'd like to invite you, if you do, to smoke them if you got them. Let's get it cracked off and let's get right into the news. So first things first, of course, we cannot start discussing the new fantasy football impact, the biggest off-season moves, without talking about the biggest move, the biggest trade that happened this entire off-season. That's going to be talking about Russell Wilson finding a brand new home, packing his boxes, and moving over to Denver. Now, you look at Russell Wilson and you might be looking at him at a negative light from last year because oftentimes we fall into the trap of falling in love with or paying too much attention to what happened last year and not following trends and not following history. Now, you look at Russell Wilson last season, injury completely stopped him from being one of the top 5 quarterbacks in fantasy football. Y'all remember when he was gang banging? I mean, it was absolutely disgusting on Thursday Night Football, seeing what he was doing with his fingers, throwing up them gang signs, throwing up those jutsus. It was extremely disgusting, and it definitely halted his entire season in fantasy football last year. Now, I want to bring up the fact that Russell Wilson did have a no trade clause in his contract, meaning that he was only willing to go to a place where he thought he had a legitimate chance to make a Super Bowl run. Now, last season, like I said, the injury interrupted his run for a top 5 quarterback, but the 2 seasons prior, you were looking at quarterback 4 and quarterback 6 in fantasy football, a top 10 quarterback in both, a top 5 in one. Now, you're looking at the weapons that he's receiving. That Denver Broncos offense is extremely explosive. You're looking at Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, KJ Hamler. It's a great trio of wide receivers. You got Javonte Williams, who's a very talented running back and is going to be the premier number 1 running back. And then you have the veteran Melvin Gordon, who's going to be an extremely amazing change of pace and a good rotational running back to have in Denver. He's got all of the weapons that he needs, and he's got a damn decent offensive line as well out in Denver. Now, one thing that I think is going to work amazing for Javonte Williams and even Melvin Gordon, if you take a chance on him, is going to be the fact that Russell Wilson, out of play action since 2019, has thrown for 9,500 yards, which is second to Thomas Edward Patrick Brady II. And then you look at the 73 touchdowns he's thrown out of play action since 2019, which is second only to Drew Brees, who had 74. So he's 1 touchdown out of play action behind the number 1 Drew Brees out of play action in 2019. That's going to be amazing for Javonte Williams, amazing for Melvin Gordon, because you have to set up the run. You have to use the run efficiently and well to set up the play action correctly. You look at the amazing speed, the amazing athleticism of that wide receiver trio that he's going to have. They are going to eat this offseason, this NFL season. I am all of the way in on the Denver Broncos offense this year, Russell Wilson included. I think he's going to definitely take his leap right back into the top 5 quarterbacks in fantasy football this season. He does it on the ground. He does it through the air. Russell Wilson is just a genius when it comes to fantasy football and when it comes to real life football. You might have even seen the 4th coming soon message on his cleats that he put up. That's a pretty bold statement, but I do believe in Russell Wilson. One thing that I might be interested to see would be Russell Wilson taking the Denver Broncos to the Super Bowl, because he beat the Denver Broncos in the Super Bowl in his career. That would be amazing. Pretty awesome to see him actually bring Denver a Super Bowl. As much as I would hate to hear Denver Bronco fans talk for an entire year living out here in Colorado. Now, before we move on to the next person that's going into a new home, if you're going into a new home or you're in your old home, you might be coming out with those new fantasy football barbecues, or the new season week 1 parties that you got coming up, or just entertaining guests on Sundays in general. You might be thinking about that one part of your house that you've been really thinking about getting painted for a really long time. Well, stop wasting your time. When you need a painter, why not call a painter? Hit up my man Mark, hit up my man Liam over at Painters Painting, and they'll get you a good estimate, and we'll get you started and get that house looking perfect when it comes to your NFL season and your holiday season parties that you got coming up. Now, moving back on to new players that have been painted onto new rosters. We're looking at Carson Wentz making his move from the Indianapolis Colts to the Washington Commanders. Carson wasn't great in Indianapolis, and he's not going to turn the Washington football team's franchise around. Commander Carson is not going to be the answer that the Washington football team, the Washington Commanders, have been searching for. However, he is a significant upgrade from Taylor Heinicke and past Washington quarterbacks, except for maybe Fitzmagic when Fitzmagic is being magical. However, Fitzmagic is no longer a thing. Carson Wentz is going to be an improvement from Taylor Heinicke. You do look at the fact that he struggled in a great situation in Indianapolis. He was pretty much handed everything that he needed in Indianapolis, and could not get it done in the final 3 games of the season, when really he just had to walk through some of the worst teams in the NFL to earn a playoff spot, and he missed the playoffs, and the Colts fell short. Heartbreaking to Colts fans around the world. Now, you do look at the fact that Carson Wentz has shown that he can support fantasy football relevance in people around him. He wasn't supporting a ton of different wide receivers and running backs, but you look at Jonathan Taylor being the best running back in football, and yes, Jonathan Taylor will remain the beast that he is, the fantasy football savant, the answer to the questions that you may have, but only if you're lucky enough to have the first or second pick in your draft will you be lucky enough to land a monster like Jonathan Taylor. He will remain the number 1 running back in football, and he was given the number 1 running back in football role under the tutelage of Carson Wentz. He also supported Michael Pittman Jr., who was wide receiver 17 in fantasy football last season. So he's shown that he can support fantasy football relevance. One thing that I would like to point out in Commander Carson's new move over to the Washington Commanders football team is that Scary Terry McLaurin might just be the most talented wide receiver that this man has ever had. And it's going to show in his fantasy football numbers. I think that Carson Wentz is not going to be a great starting quarterback. And if you find yourself with Carson Wentz as your quarterback 1, you need to make some moves. But we're too early for the move making at the current moment. Carson Wentz would be a good answer on a bye week, on an injury, on a week where you're just kind of surfing the waiver wire and getting quarterbacks and fitting them in on good matchups. But Carson Wentz will not be a good week-to-week quarterback. However, Scary Terry McLaurin will stay a amazing wide receiver that he is, and is going to be getting an improvement at quarterback than what he's had from his entire career. So Scary Terry McLaurin, I definitely am not taking any hesitation on Scary Terry McLaurin. I'm still going all in on him. He's still on my draft boards. Now, also, I think with Antonio Gibson, you look at the fact that he is no Jonathan Taylor, but Antonio Gibson is talented and is a potential RB1 candidate, at least a high-end RB2. So I'm definitely not taking any hesitation on Antonio Gibson or Terry McLaurin. At the end of the day, I don't think the move for Carson Wentz hurts them in any way. I think it only improves their stock. Carson Wentz remains a waiver wire bye-week replacement. Now, Carson Wentz leaves a big hole at the quarterback spot that was always there for the Indianapolis Colts, and they replaced him with Matty Ice from Atlanta. And as an Indianapolis Colts fan, I'm not terribly mad at it. I'm just excited to see what it's going to look like in action. You look at Matt Ryan, he's struggled in the past few years, but he has had lack of wide receiver options. Now, it's not like the Indianapolis Colts are giving him a great step up at wide receiver, but he does get Michael Pittman Jr., wide receiver 17 in fantasy football last season. He does get, hopefully, a healthy Paris Campbell returning, who is extremely fast and has game-breaking speed and game-breaking ability, and the rookie wide receiver Alec Pierce, who I really like and I have as a dark horse candidate to be a top 30 wide receiver in fantasy football this season. I think he can easily get 1,200 receiving yards and double-digit touchdowns. Alec Pierce is looking for a really big booming year, and I'm excited about Alec Pierce, so I definitely have him etched in on my draft board. You look at Jonathan Taylor, as I said before, Jonathan Taylor is going to remain the man that he is, and hopefully Derrick Henry stays healthy this year and we get to actually see a good competition between Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry. Last season, of course, Derrick Henry was running away with running back one of the season. However, he had taken so many carries. By the time that Jonathan Taylor caught up to the carries that Derrick Henry had when he went out with the injury, Jonathan Taylor was by far a better running back. When you compare them on a by carry basis, you're looking at Jonathan Taylor as a more valuable running back. However, the volume that Derrick Henry receives is amazing and it's tantalizing. But then you see what happened last season. It's hard to stay healthy when you receive the ball 30 to 40 times a game every week, especially the way Derrick Henry plays football. But we're not here to talk about Derrick Henry. We're talking about people that are in new homes. Now, going back to Matt Ryan, moving on into Indianapolis, he did leave a big hole in Atlanta, which is now filled by Marcus Mariota. I do think that Kyle Pitts is going to struggle a little bit, but Kyle Pitts is still going to remain an easy top 10 tight end, maybe even a candidate for top 5 tight end. Now, one of my favorite rookie candidates that I see this year for league winning upside, if you haven't seen that video, I'll drop a link in the description, but I did talk about Drake London coming into Atlanta. He has absolutely zero competition for targets outside of Kyle Pitts. I love Drake London and I love his ability. He has a very high floor. He may not have an extremely high ceiling with Marcus Mariota at the helm, but the floor that he presents is going to be relatively safe, and definitely I wouldn't mind taking Drake London as a wide receiver too, and I'm still all in on Kyle Pitts. However, I definitely am not expecting significant game-breaking production until I can see it with my own two eyes. Now, before we move on from the AFC South, we're talking about Matt Ryan moving to Indianapolis. I want to talk about one quick move that happened that maybe not that many people are paying attention to, and that's going to be Marlon Mack, the running back, going to the Houston Texans. He was a serviceable RB2, 1,000-yard rusher, and had extreme consistency in year one. Unfortunately, the Indianapolis Colts drafted the greatest running back in football today in Jonathan Taylor the second year, and they were just waiting for the opportunity to run Jonathan Taylor. Unfortunately, that opportunity came with Marlon Mack's injury. He returned from injury completely healthy last season. However, a lot of games, the Colts didn't even let him suit up because they knew between Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines, Marlon Mack was not going to get very much action whatsoever. So Marlon Mack is actually going to be getting an opportunity. Rex Burkhead is still there, which does lower his ceiling a little bit because Rex Burkhead is getting paid an extremely ridiculous amount by the Houston Texans right now. But you look at what Rex Burkhead has been able to produce in fantasy football over the last little bit. He's not extremely reliable, and I can see the Texans see that, which is why they acquired Marlon Mack. I can see early on Marlon Mack taking over as that lead running back and becoming one of those real surprise candidates as somebody that maybe pushed you into those playoffs later on in the season. So put Marlon Mack down on your draft boards as somebody you want to pay attention to in a new home. All right, so I'm not going to lie to you. This episode is going on a little longer than I had planned on it. There is just so much craziness that went on this offseason. It's hard to even grasp it. While I was in the middle of my research, I knew this was going to be a long video, but I figure instead of a long video, I make it easy on y'all, and I'm going to break this into 2 parts. So that's going to do it for today's first part of the free agency of this season in 2022 and the impact that it's going to have on fantasy football in 2022, the 2022-2023 season that we got coming. Your draft is right around the corner, so make sure you tune in to part 2 of the free agency so you see what the biggest fantasy impact of free agency has been this offseason and what it's all going to look like. Also, make sure you hit the subscription button and you drop a like on the video. Help your boy out. The likes help me out so much, you can't even understand how much it helps me out. So just a quick like on the video helps me out, and just a quick subscription and notification bell helps you out. So I'll see you on the next episode, and make sure you tune in to Rick T Podcast on Sunday. I will be there as well as Eric, and the other hosts of the Rick T podcast as well. We do everything on Sundays, so make sure you tune in live on Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube as well. I'll see you on Sunday, and I'll also see you on part 2 of this video here. Thanks so much for checking out the part 1, and I'll see you later. I'm the fuck up out of here. Y'all have a good one, man.